Welcome to the deep dive. So, you've handed us a whole bunch of source material. We've got project reports, technical stuff, token details, updates. It's all about Scroll.
That's right.
Our mission today, to really unpack all this information you've given us, figure out, what Scroll actually is, how it works, and maybe why it's making some noise in the Ethereum scaling world. Let's jump right in.
Sounds good. And really, the place to start with any of these scaling solutions is the problem itself, right? The challenge with Ethereum.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, Ethereum's ecosystem is amazing. It's the heart of DeFi, NFTs, so much activity. But that success means it gets clogged up.
Right, congested.
Yeah, transactions can be slow, and the gas fees, well, sometimes they get crazy high. It just makes using the network too expensive for a lot of people, especially during busy times.
That classic problem, yeah.
Yeah.
Network gets popular, and suddenly it's hard to use. So Scroll enters the picture. It's a layer 2 solution, according to the sources. What's their basic approach?
Okay, so Scroll is a layer 2, yes. And specifically, it's what's called a zkRollup.
The zkRollup.
Yeah, think of it like this. You take thousands of transactions off the main Ethereum chain, bundle them up, process them somewhere else.
Okay.
And then you post just a tiny summary back to Ethereum layer 1. But here's the clever bit. That summary uses zero-knowledge proofs, zk proofs, to mathematically guarantee that all those bundled transactions were valid.
Without having to show all the transaction details on layer 1.
Exactly. The goal is pretty straightforward. Make using Ethereum way cheaper, way faster, but crucially, without sacrificing the security you get from the main chain. It inherits that security.
And the sources really stress this compatibility aspect. They say Scroll is a bytecode level compatible zkEVM. Can you maybe break down what zkEVM means in simple terms?
Sure. So the EVM Ethereum virtual machine, that's like the engine where smart contracts run on Ethereum.
Right.
A zkEVM is basically a system that tries to perfectly replicate that EVM environment, but on a layer 2 and in a way that works with those zero-knowledge proofs we mentioned. Now, bytecode level compatible, that's the really key phrase here. It means developers can pretty much take their existing Ethereum smart contracts, the actual compiled code, the bytecode.
The stuff that actually runs.
Exactly. And deploy it on Scroll with minimal, maybe even zero, changes needed. That's huge for adoption because it makes it super easy for existing projects and devs to just move over.
That makes sense. Low friction is good. And importantly, the sources confirm Scroll isn't just theoretical. It launched on mainnet back in October 2023.
Yep, it's live.
And they worked closely with the Ethereum Foundation's PSE team, the Privacy and Scaling Explorations team. That collaboration sounds pretty significant.
Oh, absolutely. Building a zkEVM is incredibly complex, especially getting the compatibility right. Working directly with the EF team that focuses on, the EVM itself suggests a really deep commitment to aligning with Ethereum and making sure that compatibility is solid, not just now, but going forward.
Okay, let's maybe peel back another layer and look at the tech under the hood. The sources flag their specific zkEVM approach, and something about hardware acceleration as being pretty innovative.
They do. Scroll emphasizes that they built what they describe as the first zkEVM developed completely in the open, collaboratively with that EF team we mentioned. They use a specific ZK proving system called Halo 2. We don't need to get lost in the cryptographic weeds, but Halo 2 is the engine they chose for generating those crucial validity proofs.
Got it.
And they make a pretty bold claim in the sources calling it the most EVM-compatible zkEVM out there. That's a strong statement in a field with a lot of competitors.
It really is. And then there's this hardware acceleration part. They mentioned PipeZK, which sounds like specialized hardware for speeding up ZK calculations, and also that Scroll built their own GPU-based zkEVM prover.
Right.
The sources even say this GPU prover can be like 10 times faster than using a regular CPU.
Yeah.
What does that kind of speed up actually mean for a roll-up in practice?
Well, it's critical. Generating those zero-knowledge proofs is computationally intensive. It's often the bottleneck for zkRollups, not necessarily processing the transactions themselves.
Yeah, the proof generation is the slow part.
Exactly. So if you can generate those proofs faster, you can finalize batches of transactions on layer 1 much more quickly.
Which means faster finality for users.
Faster finality, better overall throughput for the network. It just Makes the whole system more efficient. But, it does raise that interesting question. If proving gets faster with specialized hardware, like GPUs or maybe even custom chips like PipeZK,
Uh-huh.
how do you make sure that proving process stays open and decentralized? You don't want only a few players with super expensive hardware being able to generate proofs.
That's a really good point, that classic trade-off again.
Yeah.
Performance versus decentralization. It seems to come up a lot in this space.
It does.
So to help understand how all this fits together, the sources actually break down Scroll's network into three sort of conceptual layers.
Yeah, that's a helpful way to think about it. First up is the sequencing layer.
Okay.
This is where user transactions first land. It includes the components responsible for ordering those transactions, executing them on the layer 2 itself, and then gathering up all that transaction data.
And getting it back to Ethereum L1.
Right. It posts that data back to layer 1, often using those EIP 4844 blobs, the cheaper data storage option we've talked about before, which helps keep costs down.
So sequencing handles the initial ordering, execution on L2, and getting the raw data onto L1. What happens next?
Next is the proving layer. This is where the heavy lifting, the ZK magic happens.
Generating the proofs.
Exactly. There's a coordinator component that takes batches of executed transactions from the sequencing layer and sends them out to a network of provers.
Okay.
These provers are the ones doing the intense computation running Halo 2, using GPUs maybe to generate that cryptographic proof that guarantees everything in that batch was executed correctly according to the rules.
Got it. So sequencing, then proving,
Right.
and then finally tying it all back to layer 1 for the security and finality.
That's the settlement layer. This layer lives entirely on Ethereum layer 1. It consists of crucial smart contracts.
Like the bridge.
Yeah, the bridge contract for handling deposits and withdrawals between L1 and L2, and also the main rollup contract. The settlement layer receives the transaction data from the sequencing layer.
Yeah.
And most importantly, it receives and verifies the validity proofs generated by the proving layer.
The verification happens on L1.
Yes. Once that proof is successfully verified by the smart contract on Ethereum layer 1, that whole batch of layer 2 transactions is considered absolutely final, cryptographically secured. It cannot be rolled back or challenged.
Okay, that makes sense. Following a transaction through those layers helps visualize the flow. The sources actually describe 3 phases for a transaction's life on Scroll.
They do. It gives a good sense of the user experience. The first phase is confirm.
Confirm. How fast is that?
Typically very fast, around 3 seconds according to the sources. This happens as soon as the sequencer accepts your transaction, puts it in its queue, and sends it off for execution on L2. So you get really quick feedback that, yep, we've got your transaction, it's being processed.
Nice. Quick feedback is always good. Then phase 2.
Phase 2 is committed. This happens when the batch that includes your transaction gets its data posted to Ethereum layer 1.
So the data is now on the main chain.
Exactly. It provides a strong checkpoint, data availability on L1. This usually takes a few minutes.
Okay, minutes for committed. And the final step, the one that means it's totally irreversible.
That's finalized. This is the crucial one. It happens when the zero-knowledge proof for that batch, the proof generated by the proving layer, is successfully verified by the settlement layer contract on layer 1.
Right.
Because of the ZK proof's mathematical guarantee, once it's verified on L1, that state change is absolute. Done deal. Can't be reversed. This finalization step, according to the sources, usually takes tens of minutes.
Tens of minutes. Okay, so let's recap. Near instant confirmed for UX, committed in minutes once the data hits L1, and then finalized in tens of minutes once the proof is verified on L1.
Exactly.
That seems like a pretty sensible progression. Now, the sources mention that this finality time, tens of minutes, is actually much faster than what you see with optimistic rollups, which often have these long challenge periods, sometimes days.
That's a really important distinction, yeah.
What does that faster finality mean for users, especially for something like, say, withdrawing funds off Scroll back to Ethereum?
It's a major advantage. With optimistic rollups, because of that challenge period, usually about 7 days, withdrawals back to L1 typically require waiting that full week to be sure the transaction won't be challenged.
A whole week, wow.
Yeah, but with SCRollups like Scroll, once that validity proof is generated and verified on L1, which takes those tens of minutes, the withdrawal is known to be valid. The funds can be released securely and much, much faster. It's a huge improvement for the user experience when moving assets back to the main chain.
Definitely sounds like it. Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about the SCR token. The sources give us some details on its purpose.
Yes, SCR. It's introduced as the native utility and governance token for the Scroll protocol.
And what are its intended uses, both sort of now and down the line?
Well, governance is slated to be live right from the start, day one. This means SCR holders can vote on important decisions about how the protocol evolves, parameters, upgrades, that sort of thing.
Okay, governance from the outset.
Yeah.
What about future uses?
Looking ahead, the vision laid out in the sources is for SCR to become really central to decentralizing the network itself. So potentially being used by the sequencers and provers we talked about earlier, maybe staking requirements or rewards. Also things like coordinating across multiple chains if Scroll expands, general staking mechanisms, maybe enabling gas-free transactions for certain applications or users, and funding various incentive programs.
So governance now, but potentially core to the network's operation and economy later on.
That seems to be the plan.
And the sources also gave us some specific numbers on the token supply as of early October 2024.
They did. The total supply is fixed at 1 billion SCR. That's a 1 billion thousand.
Right.
And the initial circulating supply when the token launched was planned to be 190 million SCR, which is 19% of the total.
Right, and they specifically mentioned an allocation for the Binance launch pool too.
Yeah, 5.5% of the total supply, so 55 million SCR, was allocated for that launch pool, which the sources noted was scheduled to kick off on October 9th, 2024.
Okay. We also got a peek at the overall distribution plan for that 1 billion total supply.
Right, it breaks down across several categories. There's ecosystem and growth getting the largest slice at 29.5%, then the Binance launch pool at 5.5%. A significant chunk, 15%, is marked for airdrops split between an initial one and future ones.
Interesting.
Then 10% for the foundation running the project, 22.95% for contributors, likely the team and early builders, and finally 17.05% for investors. It gives you a sense of how they're distributing the ownership and control over the long term.
It does. Okay, so beyond the core tech and the token details, the sources really paint a picture of pretty significant momentum since the mainnet went live in October 2023. What were some of the key progress points or indicators that stood out to you?
Well, they've clearly been focused on technical upgrades. Implementing EIP 4844 support those data blobs back in April 2024 was a big deal for lowering transaction costs.
Right. Cheaper data on L1.
Exactly. And they didn't stop there. The sources mentioned planned upgrades for later in 2024, like the Darwin upgrade in Q3, targeting a 1.7x gas reduction, and then more upgrades planned for October 2024, aiming for another 1.5x reduction.
Wow, so actively working to make it cheaper and cheaper to use.
Yeah, these aren't small tweaks. Those kinds of cost reductions directly impact users and make the platform more attractive.
And now something that really seemed to move the needle, according to the sources, was an initiative called Scroll Sessions, launched in April 2024. What was that about and what happened?
Scroll Sessions was basically an on-chain incentive program designed to get people actively using the network, interacting with dApps, bringing liquidity in.
Like a points program or something.
Kind of, yeah. Rewarding on-chain activity.
Yeah.
And the sources state it had a really dramatic impact. They use the phrase massive uptick in total value locked, or TVL, on Scroll.
And that uptick put them in a pretty strong position, didn't it?
Absolutely.
Based on the data provided.
It certainly did. The sources report that it propelled Scroll to become the #1 ZK chain by TVL, hitting US $1.15 billion as of mid-September 2024.
1.15 billion, wow.
Yeah, and they specifically call out that this number put them ahead of other major ZK players like Linea, ZK Sync, Starknet, Tyco, and Polygon zkEVM at that time, that kind of capital flowing in.
Yeah.
It's more than just a vanity metric. It suggests real confidence and activity building up.
Right, it shows users and protocols are willing to commit significant value to the ecosystem. But TVL is one thing. Are people actually using that value? Is a real activity happening?
The sources suggest so. They talk about a robust DeFi ecosystem having developed, with DeFi-specific TVL hitting close to $800 million as of late September 2024.
Almost $1 billion just in DeFi.
Yeah. And another interesting indicator they highlight is stablecoin market cap. Scroll reportedly had over $100 million in stablecoins, which they claimed was the highest among ZK chains at that point.
And why are stablecoins significant?
Well, high stablecoin value usually means there's active trading, lending, borrowing, real financial activity happening on the network, not just assets sitting there passively.
Got it. Okay, another initiative that really jumped out was something called Scroll Canvas, launched in July 2024. This seems to be about on-chain attestation. It feels like a move beyond just finance. What exactly is this on-chain attestation concept?
Yeah, this is fascinating. Attestation, especially using the standard they mentioned, the Ethereum attestation service, or E8S, is basically a way for users or applications to make verifiable claims or issue credentials directly on the blockchain.
Claims about what?
about almost anything, really, but often tied to on-chain activity. So think of it like building up a digital reputation or an identity layer based on things you've verifiably done on-chain, or credentials issued to you by trusted parties, all recorded transparently, maybe pseudonymously, on the blockchain itself.
Okay, like a verifiable on-chain resume or credential system. And the adoption numbers they reported for this, they seem pretty big.
They were really striking. The sources say that within just 1 month of launching Canvas, Scroll became the #1 chain for these EAS attestations.
#1 in a month.
Yeah. They racked up over 3 million cumulative attestations in that short time, which was apparently 5.5 times more than the next closest chain, Base.
Wow.
Hitting that kind of scale so quickly is pretty remarkable. It suggests that maybe the tools for building with attestations on Scroll are easy to use, or the community found compelling uses for them right away, or maybe both.
And why is this attestation stuff important? The source is connected to bringing net new users on-chain for real-world applications. What's the link there?
Well, this could be really significant for the future of blockchain. Attestations are like building blocks for use cases that go way beyond just crypto trading or DeFi.
Like what?
The sources mention things like verifiable digital identity, potentially streamlining KYC/ML processes, secure on-chain voting systems, credentials for decentralized organizations or DAOs, membership passes, loyalty programs, maybe even official registries.
Okay, lots of possibilities.
Right. If you can build a trustworthy, verifiable identity or reputation on-chain based on your actions or credentials, suddenly blockchain becomes useful for a whole range of activities that need trust and verification in the real world. This, theoretically, is how you start onboarding the billions of users who aren't necessarily crypto native or interested purely in finance.
That makes sense. Moving beyond finance to identity and reputation could be key for broader adoption. The sources also briefly mentioned other products, like a Scroll SDK for launching other Layer 2s and something called Key Store for smart contract wallets.
Yeah, indicating they're thinking about the broader developer ecosystem, too.
And they listed quite a few integrations and partnerships. Big names like Aave, Compound, Lido, and DeFi, infrastructure like Kobo, wallets like Trust Wallet, staking protocols like Stakestone and EtherFi. They even mentioned EtherFi's Visa card integration. Plus, Athena, Alchemy for developer tools. What does that list tell you?
It signals a few things. One, maturity. Getting big, established DeFi players like Aave and Compound builds liquidity and trust. 2, developer focus with tools like Alchemy. 3, user accessibility through wallet integrations. And 4, bridging to the real world. That EtherFi Visa card using Scroll potentially for settlement is a really interesting example. It suggests the ecosystem isn't just growing, it's becoming quite interconnected and reaching outwards.
Okay. Lastly, the sources provided a roadmap snapshot looking back at what's done and ahead to future plans. What's the main takeaway from their planned trajectory?
Well, we saw the completed stuff. Testnets, the mainnet launch, those early gas saving upgrades. Looking forward, the plans mentioned for Q4 2024 involved more tech upgrades. And then into H1 2025, they were talking about some pretty significant things. A sequencer built in Rust, potentially faster and maybe easier to decentralize than the current Go implementation. Transaction-level parallelism, which means processing multiple transactions at the same time for better efficiency, and optimizing how data is stored using something called a tray structure.
So this sounds like a continued focus on core performance, efficiency, and maybe laying the groundwork for more decentralization down the line.
That's exactly what it looks like. Prioritizing the engine, making it faster, cheaper, and more robust, potentially setting the stage for decentralizing components like the sequencer over time.
All right, so let's bring this all back to you, the listener. We've covered a lot of ground based on the sources you gave us. Why should you care about a project like Scroll with its zkEVM tech, its traction, this focus on attestations?
I mean, think about it. If solutions like Scroll succeed in making Ethereum transactions significantly cheaper and faster, it just lowers the barrier for everyone.
Right.
Interacting with DeFi, minting an NFT, voting in a DAO, all these things become more accessible globally. It could genuinely open up the ecosystem. And then there's that whole attestation angle.
Yeah, the identity and reputation piece.
If that takes off, if we start building reliable on-chain credentials, it could unlock completely new ways to use blockchain, connecting our digital lives and activities to real-world value and utility in ways we're probably only just starting to grasp.
It definitely feels like a potentially powerful combination. Okay, so just to quickly recap, we looked at why Ethereum needs scaling, how Scroll tackles that as a zkEVM zkRollup focus on compatibility. We unpacked the tech layers, sequencing, proving, settlement, and the hardware acceleration aspect.
And the transaction lifecycle confirmed, committed, finalized.
Right. We discussed the SCR token, its governance role and future potential, its supply and distribution, and then we dove into the traction, the mainnet launch, the upgrades, the impact of Scroll sessions on TVL, making it a leading ZK chain.
The growing DeFi ecosystem, and that really interesting rapid adoption of Scroll Canvas for on-chain attestations.
Exactly. It's a pretty comprehensive picture from the materials provided.
Definitely covers a lot of ground from the deep tech to the ecosystem growth.
So maybe here's a final thought for you to mull over, building on all this. Scroll explicitly states a mission to help onboard billions of users to Ethereum. We've seen their significant early success with on-chain attestations, positioning it as a tool for real-world identity and credentials.
Right.
How might that specific focus, using attestations to build bridges beyond just finance, fundamentally change? Who ends up using blockchain technology in the coming years and what they actually use it for?
Yeah.
Could this be the key to unlock that next wave of mass adoption?
It certainly suggests that the next wave might look very different, focusing perhaps more on identity, reputation, and verifiable credentials than just financial speculation. A really interesting possibility.
Something definitely worth thinking about. Well, thank you again for providing all the source material for this deep dive.